Hello dear viewer of my channel. Emily is with you. For the most interesting stories, watch the video until the end. Subscribe and like the video, I will be very pleased. I love you all.
Story time about how my obsessive ex tried to kidnap me. Disclaimer, this is not my story time, it was sent to me on Instagram. My obsessive ex and I met 3 years ago. We both live in LA and met on set on a modeling job. The first day that we met, he was totally cool, really friendly. Obviously, he was very good looking, so I liked him. But I had just gotten out of a serious relationship, so I had no intention on dating anyone. When he asked me for my phone number after the photo shoot finished, I politely said no. But guess what? The following day, I got a text message from him. He told me he asked the makeup artist for my phone number and she gave it to him. I told him that he shouldn't have done that because I had told him I didn't want to give him my phone number, but he explained that he really liked me and that all he wanted to do was just hang out like friends. At the time, I had no friends in LA. I mean, even now I only have like one good friend, so I accepted to go have breakfast with him the following day. And of course, he was the most charming guy I had ever met. And weirdly enough, we had the exact same interests. I loved horseback riding, painting, and cooking. And that's when he told me that he also loved horseback riding, painting, and cooking. He even showed me some of his paintings that he had hung up at his apartment. After that, we hung out occasionally. He would come over to my place and I would cook and we would watch a movie. After a few weeks, he invited me to hang out with his guy friends. We had a really great time and all of his guy friends really enjoyed my company. But toward the end of the night, I could tell that he was getting really jealous. When he took me home, he asked me if I liked his friends. And of course I said no. Then he said that it looked like I was having a little too much fun with them. But here's the thing, the way he said it was really cute, like almost endearing, like I actually felt bad for him. So at that time, it didn't really freak me out. We didn't speak for a few days and I realized that I was actually missing him. So I reached out and asked him if he wanted to go on an official date. And he said of course. After that first date, he asked me to be his girlfriend and I said yes. Things moved really quickly after that. He moved into my apartment, we got a dog, and we met each other's families. For 2 months, everything was going really well. I was pretty happy with the relationship, I loved our new dog, and we were both getting a lot of modeling work individually. Especially me. I got a campaign with a pretty big designer and it was my dream come true. I had to travel to Italy for the campaign and he got very jealous. He started asking me questions like who's gonna be there? Do you already know the other models? And of course I didn't. I had no idea who was gonna be there or who the other models were gonna be. This was pretty much the beginning of the end. I was in Italy for 2 weeks, and while I was there, he would constantly call me, text me, check up on me. It even started affecting the work I was doing. I would run to my phone in between shots just to answer it so that he wouldn't think I was doing something bad. The photographer even asked me to put my phone away, and I did. Of course, this made him freak out. The following day, he shows up at my hotel. He told me that I needed to start behaving like his girlfriend. Then he started going to all the photo shoots with me. He would watch me like a hawk while I was working. Things get scary. Part 2 is Part 2 of how my obsessive ex tried to kidnap me. Disclaimer, this is not my story time, it was sent to me on Instagram. After he acted really controlling and jealous in Italy, I decided to break up with him. When we got back to LA, I told him he needed to move out. He totally freaked out, grabbed my phone and threw it up against the wall. I kicked him out and told him never to come back. The following day, I had to go buy a new phone, and I told him that if he wanted to come pick up his stuff, he could. Luckily, he took all his stuff when I wasn't there, and he even left his apartment key. I thought it was all over. 3 days later, he started blowing up my phone asking if we could talk. I told him I didn't want him coming into my apartment anymore. We agreed to meet in the parking garage so that I could give him a few things he forgot, which of course he left in my apartment so that he had a reason to come back. He finally arrived and asked me to get in the car, but I told him I would not get in the car. Then he started crying and begging for me to get in the car. I had never seen him like this, so I got into the car. He instantly locked all the doors and wouldn't let me out. Then he started driving really fast. I told him to let me out of the car and he said no. I asked him where we were going, but he wouldn't tell me. We finally got into a red light and I managed to unlock the door and get out. I ran straight into a restaurant and I asked them to call the cops, but he came running in after me. Luckily, a few of the servers stopped him before he could reach me. I asked them to take him out and lock the door. I called 911 and told them everything. Within 2 minutes, a police officer was there. And when he searched my ex's car, he found rope, duct tape, and sleeping pills. The officer told me it would be easy to get a restraining order. I called my parents and they flew in straight away. They luckily arrested him that night. When my parents and I went to the police the following day, they told us that they let him out on bail and that they couldn't keep him in there because technically he hadn't done anything illegal. That's when it hit me. I was never going to be safe again as long as he was out there. Later on that day, I found out that one of his cousins is an attorney and that he would do anything to keep him out of jail. So I took it upon myself to do something. I called his modeling agency and told them about everything, and they dropped him from the agency. I moved out of my apartment and got a new phone number, but unfortunately, this hasn't stopped him from finding me. Sometimes I see his car around my neighborhood, and I know that he's made several fake accounts to follow me on Instagram. My parents want me to move back home, but I don't want to. I don't think I should live in fear of him. 2 days ago, he sent me an email and asked me if we could get together and talk. Of course, I said no, but maybe I can reason with him? I don't know. What do you guys think I should do? Storytime about how I'm in love with my sister's boyfriend and I think he likes me too. Actually, no. I know so because he kissed me 3 days ago. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. The story I'm about to tell you guys is pretty bad, so please don't come at me in the comments. I swear I'm a good girl. A little backstory. My sister and I have never really gotten along. She's 3 years older than me and thinks she's the queen of the house. And she's always seen me as competition, which I hate. My mom would always try to make us get along, but it was totally impossible. My sister was always upset at something I did. Eventually, I stopped trying with my sister and I wouldn't make any effort to make her like me. Finally, last year she moved out and I was so happy. We celebrated my 20th birthday at home last year, and of course my sister came over. But she brought this really cute boy with her. Let me tell you guys, it was instant love at first sight. I can't even explain what I felt, I just knew that I liked him. Even my mom made a comment about how good looking he was. And can I just say that I caught him staring at me a few times throughout the dinner. After that, I never really saw him because my sister and I never hung out. Until my sister lost her job because of COVID and had to move back in with us. And this meant that I was seeing her boyfriend a lot more around our house. He was so nice to me. Anytime they wanted to watch a movie, he would always invite me. If they were going to go out to eat or go to the beach, he would always invite me. Eventually, I started saying yes, well, because I liked him. And something told me that he liked me too. And yes, I know it's totally wrong, but I just couldn't help myself. Whenever I knew he was going to come over, I would dress up and look really cute. I also had a pool in the backyard, so I would make sure I was in a bikini whenever he came over. I know this sounds bad, but it's gonna get worse. Well, guess what? Around this time, my sister actually got COVID. Thankfully, she didn't get really sick, but she was a little bit under the weather. And of course, she had to quarantine. So she basically stayed in her room and we all were on the other side of the house. Of course, her boyfriend, let's call him Mark. Mark would come over and bring her food sometimes. On one of these occasions, he asked me if I wanted to go to the beach with him and his friends the following day. He knew that I was totally bored because of quarantine, so I said yes. And guess what? He didn't tell my sister that he asked me and I didn't tell her that I said yes. So it was our little secret. The following day, I wore my sexiest bikini and we had a great time at the beach with his friends. While we were at the beach with his friends, I could tell that he kept staring at me. And he caught me staring at him too a couple of times. When we drove back to our house, he made a comment about how good I looked in the bikini. That's when I told him that he looked really good too. From then on, we started flirting all the time, making little comments, staring at each other, and he also started following me on Instagram. So I got to work posting sexy stories all the time, and it totally worked because he would reply to them. That's when I sent him a naughty picture. Part 2 is up. Part 2 of how I'm in love with my sister's boyfriend and he likes me too because he kissed me. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. So after flirting back and forth through DM, I finally sent him a cute naughty picture. I mean, not so naughty, but a little naughty. And that's when he sent me one back. Then he sent me a text message saying that he wished he had met me before he met my sister. And I told him I felt the exact same way. The following day, he came to visit my sister like he usually did. My sister had COVID at the time, so he would come every single day. At this point, my sister's quarantine was almost over. So I knew I either had to act fast or talk to him and tell him that we couldn't take things further. My parents had decided to go to our lake house, so I knew I had the house all to myself. And my sister couldn't come out of her room, so he and I were basically alone in the house. That's when he asked me if we could talk. We went to the backyard so that my sister wouldn't hear us, and he confessed that he really liked me, but he didn't know how to feel about it. He also told me he felt really guilty, and I totally understood him. He asked me what I thought we should do, and I just didn't have an answer. We just stared at each other for a second, and then he kissed me. And it was the most magical kiss of my entire life. We then proceeded to make out for about 10 minutes. After that, he told me we needed to make a decision. I told him the best thing for us to do was to just be honest with my sister. We went straight to my sister's room and told her everything. Of course, my sister being the drama queen that she is, she started throwing things around in her room, and she called my parents and told them everything. Mark got on the phone with my parents and told them that he was responsible for everything, but that he couldn't lie to my sister and that he had to be honest. And yeah, I fell even harder when he said that. That's when my sister had the bright idea to lie and say that she was pregnant and that he had to get married with her. Mark hesitated but said if that was true, then yes, they would get married. I told my sister I didn't believe her and that she needed to provide a pregnancy test. Mark went and got the pregnancy test, and of course, it came back negative. Mark went home and I got on the phone with my parents, and I told them that I would step aside for my sister's happiness. My parents told me that they thought it was the best thing. So I called Mark and told him that he needed to stay with my sister. Now my sister is trash talking me to all her friends, which I expected and I guess I deserve. But should I sacrifice my happiness and his? My sister won't let Mark and I talk at all. When he comes over, I completely ignore him. What should I do, you guys? Help. Storytime about how my lying, cheating husband moved his mistress into our home. Disclaimer, this is not my storytime. It was sent to me on Instagram. My husband is a classic narcissist. He's a total love bomber, lies, and gaslights. We met through some friends at a party, and the day that we met, he totally love bombed me. He told me I was the most beautiful girl he'd ever seen, that he wanted to marry me, and that we should have kids. Unfortunately, I believed everything he said. On our second day, he told me that he loved me. And when I didn't tell him that I loved him back, he got really upset and told me that we shouldn't see each other anymore. A few weeks passed, but I couldn't stop thinking about him, so I reached out. Worst mistake of my life. At the time, I didn't realize how wealthy he was. But boy, did he start letting me know. He would flaunt that he was super rich and even invited me on a trip, which he paid for. We ended up going to the Bahamas and it was magical. Of course, I started falling in love with him. The last day of the trip, he actually asked me to marry him and I said yes. My whole family thought it was absolutely crazy of me because I only knew him for about 2 weeks. When we got back home, I moved into his beautiful house. You see, I was in a really bad situation. I had a part-time job, no savings, and basically no future. At least that's what he said. So when I moved in, he insisted that I quit my job and basically tend to the house, which I did. So I had no money of my own. This was around the time that he would start gaslighting me. Whenever we got into fights, he would call me names and just threaten me. And when I would bring it up later on, he would totally deny that he ever said anything like that. When we started planning the wedding, things calmed down. He was always at work and I was always at home. We finally got married and went on our honeymoon to Italy. And that's when he started changing even more. He would shame me whenever I tried to post a cute picture of myself on Instagram. And he basically convinced me that I was trying to get attention from other guys, so I stopped posting. Our third night in Italy, he got drunk and we got into a really big fight. I decided to leave the hotel, but when I came back a few hours later, he had a random girl in his room and told me to leave. I couldn't believe his behavior. After about 20 minutes, he let me back into the room and told the girl to leave. That's when I told him I was going to go back home and that I made a huge mistake by marrying him. He apologized and started crying. He said nothing happened to her and part of me just wanted to believe him so desperately, so I did. When we got back home, he was on his best behavior. Until one day he told me he wanted to hire a live-in cleaning lady. Little did I know it was his mistress. Part 2 is up. Part 2 of how my husband moved his mistress into our home. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. My narcissist of a husband told me he wanted to hire a cleaning lady. A live-in cleaning lady. A few days later, he shows up with this woman who clearly did not look like a cleaning lady. When I told him I did not want her living in our home, he told me that I had to do what he said because he was the breadwinner. Mind you, he told me to quit my job, so I did. That's when he told me that somebody needed to clean the house, cook for him, and basically take care of him. In other words, I wasn't doing that. Which isn't true because I made him dinners every single day and cleaned the entire house. I told him I knew she wasn't a cleaning lady and that he needed to kick her out. He got really angry and slammed the door. A few minutes later, I hear him coming up the stairs with her. He shows her to the guest room and tells her to settle in. Then he came back into the room, told me that I had to deal with it and that this is how things were going to be from now on. By the way, this girl is Russian, and my husband told me that she did not speak English. So basically, I had no way to communicate with her. But my husband did speak Russian, isn't that convenient? So, every single day, this girl would pretend to wash dishes, pretend to clean his clothes, pretend to make the bed. Oh yeah, and she would only wash his dishes, not mine. The situation was way too much for me, so I told my husband I was going to go stay with my sister. That's when he threatened me and told me that if I left, I might not be able to come back. So of course, I packed my things and went straight to my sister's house. The very next day, my husband shows up to my sister's house with divorce papers. He told me I needed to sign them because he fell in love with the cleaning lady. I told him I wouldn't sign them and he left. Then my sister called the police and told them that my husband had a woman captive in his house and that she was probably in the country illegally. And guess what, y'all? She was. The cops actually took her from the house and now he's asking me to move back in. He took the whole divorce back and wants to take me on a trip. My sister thinks I should get back with him just to make his life miserable. The problem is I have no money of my own. And to be honest, part of me still loves him. I really need some advice and perspective from someone who's not me. Crazy story time about how my husband tried to unalive me and my lover when he caught us cheating. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. By the way, I'm at the airport again. I don't know how I always end up at the airport trying to do voiceovers, so sorry if it sounds weird. My husband and I have been together for 10 years, but we were best friends before we ever decided to get into a relationship. One thing about me is that I've never been able to stay loyal in a relationship. And because my husband was my friend before, he knew that. It was a running joke in our friend group that I was never going to be able to stay loyal to one man. Eventually, when my husband and I got married, he totally never thought that I would be able to do that to him. I mean, I never thought I was going to be able to cheat on him, but there I go. Fast forward to 4 months ago. I work in the fashion industry and I'm constantly in contact with lots of models and good-looking people. So this cute guy comes into my office and he's a model and he started flirting with me right away. I mean, he was actually pretty much flirting with every woman in the office, but I was like, oh my god, he's so cute. I had 3 options. I could ignore the flirting, or I could flirt back, or I could flirt back and give him my number. I went with option C. I gave him my number and he texted me later that day asking if I wanted to go to dinner. I said yes. So I told my husband that I was going to be staying at the office late, which I did all the time anyway, and he trusted me. After that dinner, this guy and I were totally inseparable. We would meet up for lunch every single day and hang out for a few hours after I finished work, or sometimes I would get off work early to go hang out with him. I told this guy I was going through a separation and that's why I couldn't stay over at his place. And he believed me. By the way, I'm using the shade Verano from my Tanya collection with Auna. If you guys want to shop it, it's the link in my bio. My husband travels for work a lot and this was my saving grace. Whenever my husband would go out on trips, I'd invite my boyfriend to stay over at my house. While on one of those trips, my husband came home early and didn't bother to tell me. Apparently, he already had his suspicions and wanted to catch me in a lie. He catches me and my lover in the act. My husband went psycho, you guys. He grabbed his gun and held us at gunpoint for 4 hours. Part 2 is up. 2 of how my husband tried to unalive me and my lover when he caught us cheating. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. I was said to be on Instagram. When my husband catches us in the act, he pulls out his gun and holds us at gunpoint for 4 hours. The entire time, he was trashing our bedroom. My boyfriend, aka the model I was cheating on him with, basically cried the entire time and didn't say a word. While me, on the other hand, was trying to explain to my husband that he knew that I was like this. Well, that just made him angrier. Eventually, I told him that I would give him a divorce if he wanted one. And that's when my husband told me that he was never going to divorce me and that I was going to stay loyal to him for the rest of my life. And I promised him that I would. Finally, after 4 hours, he made me promise never to see this guy again, which I agreed to. The guy told me that he would never want to see me again and that he didn't want any trouble. He also told my husband that he was a victim in this whole thing and that I lied to him about being in a relationship, which is kind of true. So then my husband got even angrier. My boyfriend ran out of the house and promised not to call the police. That's when my husband told me that he already knew about the relationship and that he had been spying on me with him this whole time. When I asked him how he'd been spying, he didn't want to tell me. This led me to believe that he probably has cameras around our house and that he probably put some spyware stuff in my phone so he knows exactly what I'm doing on it. Then he told me that from now on I was to never take the pill again and that he wanted me to get pregnant as soon as possible. My career is super important to me and he knows that I don't want to have kids just yet. But now he's basically forcing me into having children. I told him we should really consider getting a divorce or at least going to couples counseling and he doesn't want to. I know I shouldn't have cheated on him, but at the same time I'm being forced into staying in this relationship and I'm being forced into getting pregnant. He's even dropping me off at work and picking me up. I feel like he's always watching me and I don't know what to do. I also feel bad because I broke his heart and I know he's hurting, but he's totally going about this the wrong way. I know you guys are going to have some advice on what I should do, so please comment. My best friend thinks I should just go file for divorce during my lunch break, but I don't know. I feel like it's just going to make him kill me. What should I do?
Story time about how my crazy ex-girlfriend is trying to control my life, take over my Instagram, and keeps DMing girls on Instagram to block me. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. So most of you know that this girl DM'd me and asked me to block her boyfriend. Well, I contacted her boyfriend, told her about it, and he told me his story time about her. I met my crazy ex last year. We actually started talking at a party. We live in the same city and have the same friends, so I knew about her. After the night I met her at the party, I decided to ask her out. I mean, she looked like a normal, sweet girl, but little did I know that she was gonna make my life miserable. So we started following each other on Instagram and exchanged phone numbers. We went to the beach and had a really nice first date. Again, super sweet girl. We went out on 3 more dates before I asked her to be my girlfriend. On the 4th date, she came over to my family's house and we had lunch. Of course, she made the best impression on my entire family. I mean, she kind of seemed like too good to be true, you know? She was super cool, easy to talk to, and really funny. The only person out of my family that did not like her was my sister. My sister told me that she got the impression she was only acting the way she thought I wanted her to act. I told her she was being paranoid and to give her a chance. So about 2 weeks into us dating, she started staying over at my apartment. But here's the thing, she basically moved in. She brought over a bag of clothes, her toothbrush, moisturizer and shit, like girly stuff that I just had no idea about. I didn't say anything to her, but in my mind I was like, whoa, this is moving a little too fast. A few days later, one of my friends had his bachelor party. So of course I told her that I was gonna go, and she got really mad. She told me that if she couldn't go to the party, then I shouldn't go at all. I explained to her that this party had been planned for months now. She then grabbed my phone and called my friend whose bachelor party it was, and she basically asked him if she could come. My friend thought it was super weird, but eventually said yes. So my crazy girlfriend got herself invited to the bachelor party. And guess what? It was at a trip club. So she spent the entire time telling me that she was super uncomfortable and didn't let me have fun at all. I barely spent time with my friends and the bachelor because she wanted me to stay with her because she felt so uncomfortable. I asked her if she wanted to go home and she said yes. I told her I'd go get her a cab, but she started to cry and told me that I needed to leave with her too. That's when I put my foot down. I mean, for her to show up to the party was bad enough, but now she's asking me to leave? I told her I was not going to leave with her and that she needed to give me space. She started begging and crying. I couldn't believe my eyes. She had never behaved this way before. I put her into the cab and she went home. Then she ignored me for 4 days and I had to beg her to talk to me. I told my sister what was going on and my sister got really angry. She said it wasn't normal for her to be behaving that way so early into the relationship and that I shouldn't be begging her. So I stopped. A few days later, she shows up to my apartment angry because I stopped chasing her. She told me that clearly I didn't didn't love her. Mind you, we hadn't told each other we loved each other. When I told her I didn't love her back, she started yelling and running up and down the hallway in my apartment building. I told her to calm down, and one of my neighbors came outside and asked if she was okay. She ran into my apartment and pretended like nothing had happened. This is where it gets crazy. Part 2 is up. Part 2 of how my crazy ex is trying to take over my life, my Instagram, and keeps DMing girls to block me. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. So a few days after she ran up and down my hallway acting all crazy, I asked her if she wanted to take a break. Of course, she said no. And she told me the best thing was for her to move in with me. Like, what? I mean, I had one foot out the door and this girl was trying to move in. Then I just had to be honest with her. I told her I didn't like how she invited herself to my friend's bachelor party, how she ruined the night for me, and then basically acted all crazy. I mean, we had only been dating for 2 weeks at that point. She started to apologize and told me if there was anything I could do to forgive her. I felt bad for her, so I told her I'd give her a second chance. Worst decision of my life. Then she was suddenly back on her best behavior. This is when she started asking me questions about Instagram. She wanted to know who were the girls that I followed on Instagram. So I told her they were just girls that I didn't even know. Then she pulls out her phone and shows me my Instagram and starts scrolling through the list of all the people I follow. One by one, she started pulling up profiles and asking me if I knew the girls. I told her that if it bothered her that much, then she should just stop looking at my Instagram. That's when she told me she wanted to check my DMs just for her peace of mind. Of course, I had been DMing with other girls, but that was before I even started dating her. So I basically told her that she would find conversations from before we started dating. I made her promise not to get mad, and she promised. I gave her my phone and she started checking my DMs. She saw there were no new conversations, but she asked me if she could read through the other messages with other girls. I mean, some of these girls were only friends. I put my foot down and I said no to give me my phone back. She refused and started trying to read those conversations. So I snatched my phone from her hand and told her that she was being crazy. Later that night when I went to sleep, she decided to go snooping on my Instagram again. Unfortunately for her, I caught her. And when she gave me my phone back, she had changed my password. So I couldn't even get into my Instagram anymore. So of course I broke up with her and told her to leave. A few days later, my sister heard that my ex was telling everyone she broke up with me because I hit her. Everyone was believing her. She even called my boss and told him that I had been abusing her for weeks. Thankfully, my boss didn't believe her. He knows me since I was a kid and knows that I would never touch a woman like that. That's when I heard from girls on Instagram telling me that my ex was telling them to block me. And that's when I heard from Esther Tanya. 4 days ago, my sister bumped into my ex and confronted her about everything. She told my sister I cheated on her, that I hit her, and my sister punched her. She even threatened to press charges against my sister. My mom had enough and reached out to my ex's mom. By the way, my ex's mom had no idea she was doing any of this. Her mom called me and told me that she had done things like this before, and that the best thing for me to do was just to ignore her and hope that she didn't do anything else crazy. What do I do?
Story time about how I exposed my abusive, toxic boyfriend. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. My boyfriend is and has always been very charming. He has a ton of friends and everyone loves him. He's a very good-looking guy and girls are always chasing him. I met him 2 years ago at a party. I had heard a bunch of stuff about him. I heard that he was a player and that he cheated on all of his girlfriends. So when he came up to me at the party, I was really cold. I basically told him I didn't want to talk to him and that I would never give him my number. And unfortunately, this made him try even harder. He could never take no for an answer. He spent an hour trying to convince me to go to have breakfast with him the next day. He was so charming and so good looking. Of course, I eventually said yes. Even a few of his guy friends at the party told me not to go. But of course, I ended up going with him to breakfast the next day. We hung out a few times and then he told me that he liked that I wasn't easy. He told me that I was different from other girls and he asked me to be his girlfriend. I said yes because I was starting to catch feelings. One night we went out with his friends and he started calling me stupid in front of them. Part 2 is up. Part 2 of how I exposed my abusive, toxic boyfriend. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. So we went out with his friends one night and he started calling me stupid in front of them. He had never done this before and I was really surprised. I thought maybe he was just doing it to impress his guy friends. That's when I asked him straight up in front of his friends why he kept calling me stupid. One of his friends steps up and says, "Yeah, why do you keep calling her stupid?" He stayed quiet for a second and didn't know what to say. Then he just laughed it off and said, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize I was doing that." That's when his friends started asking me questions about myself. I told him I was studying to be an engineer and that I had graduated with top honors. Well, let's just say they were all super impressed. We finally got into his car and he was driving me home. I was upset at him, so I decided not to give him a kiss goodnight. I started getting out of the car and he grabbed my wrist really hard. He pulled me back into the car and forcefully kissed me. He said that I embarrassed him in front of his friends, but that he'd give me a pass for it. I was actually in shock. A few weeks later, we were at the mall and he pulled my hair because he said I was looking at some guy. I tried to get up and leave and he wouldn't let me. Part 3 is up. Part 3 of how I exposed my abusive, toxic boyfriend. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. So at the mall, he pulled my hair back because he thought I was looking at a guy. Then I tried to get up from the table, but he wouldn't let me. That's when he said he was going to have to control me more from now on, because clearly I was trying to look for other guys. Then he dropped me off at my dorm room and insisted on coming up. I told him I didn't want him to and that we should reconsider the relationship. I told him he needed to cool off and reconsider how he treated me. That's when he started to cry instantly. He started apologizing and told me that I was right. Then he told me that he loved me. We hadn't used that word before. I didn't realize at the time that he was totally manipulating me. And unfortunately, I decided to give him another chance.
A few days later, he asked me why I didn't tell him I loved him back. I told him I just wasn't sure. Then he started yelling at me, telling me that there were so many girls ready for him to be single, and that he had a girl text him every single night, but he would say no just because of me. So I told him I loved him. After that, he was a lot nicer, until one night he slapped me. Part 4 is up. Part 4 of how I exposed my abusive, toxic boyfriend. Disclaimers is not my story time. I sent me on Instagram. One night he took me out to dinner and started asking me all these weird questions. He wanted to know about my last ex and why we broke up. And when I didn't give him enough information, he got really angry. When we got in his car, he slapped me and told me that I was a liar. After that, he just got worse. He would randomly just push me up against a wall if I annoyed him. He would constantly take my cell phone and start checking it. He even made me give him the password to my email. I decided that I was going to start recording all the abuse. I started recording all of our conversations and even set up a camera in my room. And of course, I had all this proof. One day I finally told him I didn't want to be with him anymore and he threatened me. I also told him that I was going to go to the police. Then he told me I would never be able to leave him and that no one would believe me because he never left bruises. That's when he started stalking me. He would also show up in my apartment and try to force his way in. He would grab me and try to kiss me and I would just push him away. So I finally went to the police. And I also went to the head of the school. I finally got a restraining order and the school expelled him. If you've experienced any of this, please get out of your relationship. Don't make my mistake. Story time about how I found my husband using Tinder and all the freaking dating apps. Claim this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. Once again, I'm at the airport, sorry. My husband and I were both total sluts when we met. He was seeing like 10 girls when I first met him, and I was dating 3 guys at the time. Well, let me tell you, neither of us trusted each other, like not one bit. Eventually, he asked me to be his girlfriend, and I really wasn't sure if I wanted to say yes, but I did. He is so good looking. Like everywhere we go, we get told we're such a good looking couple. So we know we're both pretty good looking. To be fair, we were both addicted to Instagram. I would get tons of DMs from guys, and sometimes I would answer. And I know that he was getting DMs from girls, although he never told me. We dated for a year, and then he asked me to marry him. Of course, I said yes. I thought this was his way of telling me that he was going to commit to me 100%. After 6 months of being married, I started getting really suspicious. He would never leave his phone unattended. And if we were having dinner, he would always put his phone face down. I know you all know that's a red flag. Basically, he was hiding his phone from me like all the time. One night, we got super drunk and I made sure to wait until he fell asleep. I got on his phone and found Tinder, Bumble, and Hinge. Part 2 is up. Part 2 of how I found out my husband was using Tinder, Bumble, and Hinge all at the same time. But yeah, and cheating on me. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. So I got him drunk enough that he fell asleep. I got onto his phone and I found all the dating apps. I quickly screenshot every conversation he'd had on each of the apps. I was literally on his phone for 4 hours. Like, I didn't sleep at all that night. And the whole time I was reading his messages, I was crying. Like, I literally thought he was dedicated to me. I sent myself all of the screenshots and then deleted them from his phone. I also went through his Instagram and found a bunch of DMs from different girls. And a lot of them were big influencers. I can spill so much tea about that, by the way. I found a bunch of naked pictures from girls as well, and he even had a freaking Snapchat. At that point, I couldn't look anymore. So here's what I did. I invited both of our families to our house for dinner, ordered from a super fancy restaurant, and made sure everyone was coming. When we sat down to dinner, I told him I was going to go get my laptop. He asked me why, and I told him to give me a second. He literally thought I was going to give him a big surprise. That's when I exposed him in front of both of our families. Part 3's up. Story time about how I found out my roommate put cameras all over our apartment and was spying on me. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. I've been living with my roommate for 2 months now. She says she's a model, but she does a lot of other stuff. But like, if you look at her Instagram, she's a straight up model. Oh yeah, she's also trying to be an actress. Needless to say, she struggles with paying the rent. Me, on the other hand, I work in finance and I have no problem paying rent. In fact, I helped her pay for our deposit. I help her with groceries every month, so basically, I treat her really well. Her and I have been friends for about 4 years now, but we were never really best friends. And to be honest with you guys, I really didn't know her very well when we moved in together. Because of COVID, I've been working from home and it's been amazing. My roommate is never home. Also, she has a lot of friends, so she's always out. Last week, she came home and installed some speakers into our living room and our kitchen. I didn't think anything about it. I was just like, okay, cool. She asked me if I wanted one for my room and I told her I'd let her know. Later on that day, I see a freaking speaker in my room. 2 days ago, I had a boy over in my house. He asked me why I had cameras all over my place. Part 2 is up. Part 2 of how I found out my roommate put cameras all over our apartment and was spying on me. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. Listen to me on Instagram. But one day I have a boy over and we're watching Netflix. That's when he starts looking around my apartment and asks me why I have cameras installed. I was like, what cameras? He's like, all those speaker things are cameras. Don't you know that? That's when I nearly had a panic attack. He grabbed them, opened them up, and showed me the camera that was inside. Like I said, my roommate told me they were speakers and she even offered to put one in my room, which she did. That's when he told me that my roommate has been spying on me and recording everything I've been doing while I've been home alone. He then suggested we go into her room and see if she had one in there. We walk into her room and start searching. That's when I get a message from my roommate. It's a picture of me and the guy in her bedroom. And she started saying that I was stealing from her room and that she was going to take legal action. Of course, being smarter than her, I know I'm not breaking any laws. When I told her that she had been recording me the whole time and that I was the one that was going to take legal action, she told me she was sending the cops over. That's when my friend opens her laptop and finds all the videos she had recorded of me. Guess what? She had been uploading them to a website where people were paying to watch me. Part 3 is up.
Part 3 of how I found out my roommate put cameras in our apartment to record me and sell it on the internet. Disclaimers, is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. After I found all the footage on her laptop, I went straight to the cops. The cops came back with me to my apartment, and when she arrived, they arrested her. Then she started saying that she had no idea how any of that got there, and that the guy that sold the speakers, aka the cameras, to her was just some guy that she met on the street, and that she thought she was getting a good deal. She says that he was probably the one that was spying on us. But obviously, all the proof is on her laptop. She was selling my videos on 4 websites. And guess what? She was making a lot of money. She only spent 2 nights in jail. Her dad is a pretty powerful guy, so we got her out of jail. Her parents want to give me money so that I won't talk about it again because they say that it's going to ruin her future acting career. I don't know what to do. Should I accept the money and never talk about it again? Or should I expose her? I mean, she's really not famous or anything. I could take the money and expose her later on if she does become famous. But I did reach out to all her old roommates and friends and told them what she did. One of her roommates even told me she did the same thing to her. I'm also considering getting a restraining order. What do you guys think I should do?